Hello, I'm Tom Harper.
And I'm Diana Thomas,
Welcome to That Wilbur Smith Show.
a podcast about the historical, geographical, natural, and human background to the world of Wilbur Smith.
So I'm riding a Ferris wheel up to get a good view of Cape Town, and I suddenly realised that maybe doing that in the famous Cape Doctor, the black sou'easter wind, is maybe not such a good idea. This thing is rocking about all over the place. In the Courtney series, Cape Town is kind of a nexus where the characters are always kind of passing through, settling for a while, and then moving on. What strikes me is just this sense of wonder at these places that I've read about and imagined, and in some cases actually written about. I'm in Company Garden in Cape Town. This is a place that features in the novel Tiger's Prey, which I wrote with Wilbur. It was where the Dutch farm vegetables for sold to passing ships, and it's also where two characters have a pretty bloody fight. So it's pretty exciting to be able to walk through it. I've read about it, I've written about it, and now being there in front of me, kind of coming to life in 3D, it is real, and that is pretty awesome. The historic moment, this is the first time I've ever been seen in public with a selfie stick.
And those words were taken from the Tom Harper story, an epic film. It's got laughter, it's got tears, it's got adventure, it's got heartbreak. It's the story of a young man who leaves behind the quiet domestic world of Waitrose essentials, and armed only with a sun hat, some bug spray, and yes, his trusty selfie stick, goes out around the world to find his true self in the world of adventure. And oh no, wait, no, sorry. That was an extract from Wilbur Smith Inspiring Adventures, which is actually a wonderful documentary about Wilbur Smith and his effect on his readers and the way in which his work has changed their lives. And we're very pleased to welcome today the director of the film, Aidan Woodward, who describes himself, I think, really quite modestly as a renegade maverick documentary filmmaker. And he's done a wonderful job on this documentary. So Aidan, first, this is a traditional opening question. How did this project start to come about?
It was a project that a friend of mine suggested, who is involved in the Wilbur Smith Foundation, and he mentioned I could have free reign, so I jumped at it. I've got a bit of Wilbur history, having read a few things growing up, and my dad used to read them and pretend that they were stories he'd made up as my bedtime stories, and so there was an affinity. So I thought, why not?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I should also say that we have a fourth guest, Chris Wynn, our hitherto silent, mysterious producer, who is stepping out from behind his massive control desk to join us today. Hi, Chris.
Thank you. Well, it's very good to be here. And I must say, I wanted particularly to join this podcast because I'm one of those people who knew very little about Africa until I started reading Wilbur's books. And now I just cannot wait to go to Africa. And I am so envious of Tom that he actually got the chance to go and see all the places in Wilbur's books. And I'm hoping I should be able to follow in Tom's and Wilbur's footsteps one day. But I do have one question for Aidan, just to start with. Was Tom temperamental as a star? Did he demand his own Winnebago, white lilies, a mint on his pillow at night, and that sort of thing, or was he well behaved?
Well, this very mild, calm-mannered man you hear before you is an act. Yes, he's a complete diva. He take after take after take, very demanding.
He's just like that with us too. Yeah, absolutely.
I've had nothing but trouble with him.
Yeah, disaster.
Quite moody. Yeah. No, he was an absolute. It was an absolute joy. It was an absolute joy. Very, very lovely to work with.
But Tom, I must say, did you, was it as magical as it sounded on the documentary to actually see those places you read about?
Yeah, it was incredible. And I was lucky on two counts. I was lucky in the first place to go in the first place because I'd been working on the Wilbur books for probably 3 years by that point. And the books I'd worked on, we'd kind of been circling Africa. So we'd had books that were set in India, books that were set in North America. And we'd got to the point where really we had to kind of take the bull by the horns and take the Courtneys back to Africa. And I knew there was no way I could contribute to those books at the level that Wilbur's readers kind of demand without having been there. And so luckily, Wilbur flew me out there. The other reason I was lucky was because this was in January 2020. And 2 months later, the world shut down. So I just got it in before all that happened. I remember, there were small stories on the news about this sort of virus in China, and everyone thought it would come to nothing. So yes, it was incredible to be there and seeing that world that Wilbur had conjured in my head for so long. So I had such clear ideas of what it was, and it was almost like one of those, those books where you have like the ruins, and then you have like the overlay of what it must have looked like in days gone by, and it was like I was seeing it through those two levels, what was actually there, and then the kind of mental version that Wilbur had kind of built in my mind. So yeah, it was an extraordinary experience.
I mean, as you were going around places, I realized that you were actually going to a lot of places that we've talked about in these podcasts. I mean, what's the river which marks out the border of Zululand?
Yeah, the Tugela, the Tugela River. Yeah.
The Tugela, right. Now, we were talking about, because we were talking about those locations and when we were talking about when the lion feeds and Rorke's Drift also. And then I'm sure there are places like the Drakensberg, which seem to me to be part of the journey that is taken by the Ballantines coming towards South Africa in a Falcon's Flies. But just to see the landscapes, those gigantic, huge landscapes, which seem to just go on and on and on forever, suddenly that made descriptions that we'd been talking about and reading from the books in our podcast completely come to life.
Yeah. And in fact, I went back and wrote a whole new climactic sequence for the book I was working on at the time on the basis of what I'd seen, because I was in this... in fact, in the Drakensberg that you mentioned in the mountains, and there's this river gorge where you sort of clamber up and you're sort of scrambling over waterfalls and through pools and through sort of great clefts in the rock in this incredible bowl of mountains. And the climax of in fact the book that's coming out next year is entirely based on that, and that's something I'd never have thought of if I hadn't actually been there and kind of walked in that location.
If I remember, you were quite rightly telling me, hadn't you thought you would sort of take a bit of an adventure yourself and go off piste a bit, and didn't you bump into a load of locals that said, "Hey, come with us," and didn't they sort of hack their way up the stream with you, and you kind of made some brand new friends that inspired it as well?
Yeah, it was an extraordinary day. So I'd hiked up the path as far as the path went, and the path ends. So going up this is actually the headwaters of the Tugela. The Tugela starts, it sort of plunges, I think something like 2,000 feet over this sheer cliff face in this massive kind of mountain amphitheater. And then it runs through various kind of clefts and gorges before it emerges into the plain. And I'd hiked up as far as the first cleft, and I was sort of peering into it, and the path ended, and I was on my own. And I was thinking, well, it's probably about as far as I'm going to go. And then this group of young South Africans rocked up, and we got chatting, very friendly. And they all sort of stripped off they all had their swimming costumes on, they all stripped off. And they said, right, we're going to go up this gorge. And I thought, well, I can't, I'm desperate to see it. And I didn't feel entirely safe on my own, but with a group, I thought, actually, yeah, let's go for it. Of course, I didn't have my swimming costume on, so I had to strip down to my pants, which is these people I just met. But there we go. That's
why do you have to strip down to your pants?
Oh, because you're wading. There's no path. You're wading through the river.
Okay.
So the river's coming out of this sort of natural. It's basically carved a channel, which is the cliffs are so high and they sort of come together at the top, so it's created almost a natural tunnel. And the stones are worn incredibly smooth, so it's quite hard to keep your footing. And then as you go up, you eventually come to these sort of little cataracts and rapids and And I was thinking, okay, well, that's as far as we're going to go. But the guy who was sort of leading this group of people I was with, he was like, oh no, we can get up there. And actually was clambering up the rocks of this little waterfall as it's sort of cascading down, you know, the headwaters of the Dugala cascading down in front of you. And then eventually we got up into this little pool that's completely surrounded by sort of high walls, with again another waterfall. And this one was too steep to climb up, but you could actually swim, you know, the classic kind of Robin Hood type thing. You could actually swim under the waterfall, and there's this tiny natural little crevice behind it where you could shelter. Yeah, it was incredible.
Oh, there's one of those in the seventh seal.
Yeah,
the seventh seal, the seventh scroll.
Yeah.
So, Aidan, you weren't with Tom the whole time?
No, I wasn't. No, quite the contrary.
He had his selfie stick. It's all filmed on a selfie stick.
Yeah, no. What happened was we got to know each other in England, and as the project came alive, and I went to visit Tom and his family at home. Did a little bit of preparatory filming and an interview, and chatted about what was on the agenda, and then Tom and I filmed this, and it's in the film. Tom sort of gets these maps out and starts tracing the journey that he's going to be taking, and his two very wonderful kids
they're so sweet.
Pop their heads around the corner and go, oh, we want to know what's going on. So they dive into the scene, and they're sort of asking brilliant questions like, will you be eaten by tigers, Dad? And things like this. So, it was very, very good. And Tom sort of did a wonderful kind of breakdown of each stage and each step and what he would be hoping to see and where he'd be hoping to go. And of course, there's just wasn't a possibility of me being able to travel with him because there were a few other things that had to be filmed, and I had to be in different places, and it was a very sort of intimate project. So there weren't many of us making it. I think there was only two of us.
I asked for him to come with me, and instead they gave me a selfie stick.
That's right. Yeah, but I actually, weirdly, funnily enough, I think if you watch it, I find, and I was saying this only the other day, I find your stuff, Tom, because we had a good chat about it, just because everyone likes to film in portrait, don't they? So I was saying, please film in landscape, because that's...
Oh no, I hate people who film in portrait. Yeah. It drives me nuts. So
it was like, landscape. And nothing is off limits. Have fun. Just document, and if you see something you like, ping a bit of footage off. Make sure you're in a couple of things. We kind of did a little checklist back and forth, didn't we? And then the results were just far better than I could have hoped for, because they were just full of your wit and charm, which worked really well against the more sort of traditional filming of it. So I think the thing comes alive with your bits. I really enjoy them, and especially the bit with Wilbur as well. There's a really sweet bit with Wilbur.
Yeah.
I love the adorable bits when you're wearing a little cagoule walking around the garden in Cape Town. It's teeming with rain, and it was very, very British. Yeah. I'm going to garden anyway.
Yes.
I'm not going to let a bit of rain stop me.
That's right. Yeah, that was the selfie stick moment, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was the selfie stick moment.
The first time I had ever used a selfie stick. Yeah, that's great.
Which that was entirely true. That wasn't a gag. That was because again, I'm sort of not a person who likes to be filmed, and not a person who likes to be drawing attention to myself, filming myself. So the selfie stick was procured especially for this trip, and then I thought, God, I'm going to have to use this now.
I did actually feel for you walking through, holding your selfie stick and thinking, oh my God, everybody's going to think what a complete plonker I am.
That's exactly it.
That's why he did it in the rain, because there was nobody around.
It's true. There weren't many people around at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you find as writers that you have like a filing cabinet in your brains when you're traveling and walking and looking and seeing and listening?
Totally.
Yeah.
I find that actually being in a place really does inspire you, feeling it and smelling it and experiencing it with all the senses.
Smell, I think. I mean, it sounds a silly thing, but that like African earth at night has a spicy smell. And I remember years ago, and I sort of remembered this being on a game drive in South Africa, and the sort of after the sun had gone down, the sky was purple. It was like this deep purple, not like a sort of sunset purple, but just and I remember thinking, okay, smells of spice, sunset is purple, and it kind of goes in the filing cabinet. And then again, I'm pretty sure I've used that those kinds of images in books with Wilbur. Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't Robin Ballantyne in A Falcon Flies smell Africa from the boat when she can't quite see it in the dark?
Mm. Yeah, I think she does.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been a bit nervous, though. I've not really tried to compete with. I mean, I always took the view that Wilbur, his knowledge of African scenery, of the wildlife, of the trees, the plants, everything, was so extraordinary and so sort of hardwired into him, because he not only he grown up, but his forefathers grown up. I mean, he's a multi-generational African, as it were. That I've sort of stayed clear of doing any big kind of wildlife scenes. I think you can't compete with that. You'll just feel like a pathetic, washed out carbon copy. But
Yeah.
You say that, Tom, don't you? In the documentary, you say that Wilbur actually lived in Africa for nearly 90 years.
Yeah.
And you had to catch up everything in 2 weeks or whatever it was, however long you were there.
10 days. It was 10 days, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, 10 days.
Yeah. I think in fairness to our listeners, we should point out that although we've mainly been talking about me in this movie, I am only one small part of it. It is not actually the Tom Harper story.
So modest, you really are. You're so modest. Don't know? It is about you.
Yeah,
Let's be honest about this. It is about you.
The best part.
You're too kind. You're too kind. But no, it is the Wilbur Smith movie. And Aidan, I think one of the things we discussed early on was that you'd been asked to make the Wilbur Smith movie, but Wilbur was even more camera shy than I was, and he didn't really want to be in it. So you're sort of confronted with the question of how do you make the Wilbur Smith movie without the title character?
That's right.
Obviously, part of the answer is you get Tom Harper in it, but that's not the entire answer. So how did you approach that?
That was an interesting challenge, to make a film about somebody where they were camera shy and didn't want to really have the spotlight put onto them. But so yeah, we kicked it around a little bit and came up and sort of decided to just look at it from a completely different angle. So if you couldn't deep dive into Wilbur in his life, then how else could we celebrate his work? And it very quickly became clear, especially from speaking to you, from speaking to fellow writers that were very fond of him and people that were very fond of him, just this groundswell of appreciation and people wanting to tell. It became very, very obvious that people were very keen to tell a story as to what inspired them about his work, how his work had kind of made something click inside for them to achieve something, or to give them strength to get through a difficult situation, or to turn their life in a different direction. And the more people I was just chat to about the project, still looking for how can we do it, the more people sort of came up with these little moments. So the sort of the light bulb finally went off. It was like, here we go. This could be a way of approaching it.
But how did you find all these people? I mean, some of them are other co-writers, but there's also lots of people like the guy who goes kite surfing down in South Africa, or I loved also the British Asian guy with a Scottish accent, who's the detective thriller writer and winner of the Wilbur Smith Adventure Prize.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose some of them would come out of that sort of thing, but some of them I was thinking, there's a South African sculptor who went flying, and how did you find all these people?
Through the usual way with a documentary. You start spreading the word, you drop into social media, you put stuff on the Wilbur site, speak to friends of friends, people just trawl through the internet about anyone who may have got an amazing quote, and then just approach them, and one thing kind of dominoes into another. And some of those, I was quite lucky because I've been to South Africa quite a few times, and I've got some friends in Cape Town, and I knew that I would have to go and do a trip to do a little bit of filming in Cape Town. And so I just thought, well, I can extend that trip if characters pop up. And then I also intended to actually travel a little bit around South Africa itself and go to some hotspots that appear in the books, and where a few other characters were, and also to mop up a lot of natural history, because I do natural history filming as well. And of course, a massive part of Wilbur's books are animals, and the feeling that we've just been describing in the bush, what it smells like, what it sounds like, what it tastes like. I want to get as much of that as possible as well. So all these connections over the years of making natural history films and making documentaries in Africa or around Africa with Africans, it just paid dividends, and people just popped up like mushrooms one after another.
There's a kind of amazing meta moment where you are filming someone who's filming someone, and it's that South African documentary maker, and what you're seeing him film is an incredibly deadly cobra. And I remember thinking, I was thinking, I'm not sure I'd want this assignment, because if when the cobra is about to be loosed into the wild, and it could slither in your direction. As it happens, it goes in the opposite direction. Yeah. But I would be thinking, if that cobra comes anywhere near me, I'm running, but then it's probably going to go faster than I am.
Well, I felt quite confident, because the cobra handler so the guy I was filming that you're referring to is Hansa, who is a wildlife filmmaker himself.
Yeah.
And he is a friend of mine. And when I was mentioning this project, I kind of wanted Hansa to help out. And he said, "Oh, Wilbur, oh my God, I love his books. One of the reasons I became a wildlife cameraman was because of Wilbur." That was without me telling him what the documentary was about. So I was like, tick, we've got another character. So he filmed with that snake handler before a couple of times in the past on Discovery documentaries and whatnot. And his name's Sean. And one thing he didn't tell me about Sean was that Sean is one of the most, let's just say, not particularly safety conscious.
No.
And then he went, I think it's actually in the documentary, he goes through this litany of bites and attacks, and where he's slightly taken his eye off the ball and had his finger bitten off, and this has happened, and been close to death.
I just remember that he'd actually been bitten by a cobra, and I'm thinking, what? And now you're handling cobras?
Now you're handling another one. Yeah.
And also he's handling it in no way pointing the head away from him.
No,
he's sort of holding it to get away from the slight stick, but the cobra is sort of waving its head in a sort of very cobra-like way, with its sort of thing flaring out around its head, and pointing at him.
Yeah, all of the name of getting the shot. I think there are a number of times he would say, and I've probably cut a few of them out, where he'd say, Is that a nice angle? Do you want me to get it a bit angrier? Do you want me to like it to face you a little bit more? And we're going, no, it's absolutely fine as it is. Don't worry.
Keep the cobra nice and calm. Definitely don't. I think rule number one of filmmaking is don't piss off the cobra. I mean, that's like, I think we can, don't do that. That's a rash move.
And in life.
And yes, he said that once the cobra gets you, you've got 3 hours to live, haven't you? And then, then you can't breathe and you collapse and die.
Well, your whole system shuts down. It seems like an entirely unpleasant way to go.
Yeah, I don't think it's particularly nice.
Of course, deadly snakes played a big part in Wilbur's life, didn't they? Didn't he have a couple of near misses?
And mambas as well.
They were mambas, yeah.
Yes, mambas. They're mambas.
Mambas, yeah.
Including the one where he's wearing a pith hat, as it were, and the mamba bites the hat, and the venom is dropping down him.
Yeah, so that's kind of a couple of inches away from death, which he's probably experienced numerous times in his life, being the upbringing he's had. Yeah.
Yes, I guess that's what all writers should do, really, isn't it? Experience a couple of near-death moments, so that we can go on and write about them properly.
Funny, yes.
I prefer to use my imagination.
I thought the other interesting thing was Kate Silverton, the broadcaster and newsreader and journalist, who I'd seen at a couple of sort of Wilbur Smith events, but I hadn't realized quite how dedicated, what a dedicated fan she was, Wilbur's, but also how he had really inspired her to go out into the world, and I think going off to Zimbabwe and stuff when she was very young, just a teenager. And then she'd named her own son Wilbur, which is just adorable.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
And I mean, because quite often you can get a sort of, as well, a celebrity endorsement, and it's sort of somewhat half-hearted. But when somebody says, "No, I've actually named my son Wilbur," you think, "Oh no, okay, you really are a fan."
Yes,
fair dues.
But she actually, we got I'm trying to remember. I don't think it's in the film, is it? Is there the picture? Oh, my memory's so terrible. Of Wilbur meeting Big Wilbur meeting
Yes,
Little Wilbur.
I think
Oh,
there
it
is.
is.
Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
great. It is in. So I do remember her. I remember badgering her for the picture.
Did you actually make this film, or you just? Have we got the right guy on here?
It was a while ago.
Chris, you put this guy in. It's clear he hasn't got a.
I'm sorry. I know he's all we could afford.
Unfortunately, my brain is
Yeah.
my brain is full of Yemeni rebel drone attacks on Saudi
cool.
oil fields at the moment. So I've only got a tiny amount of bandwidth to remember
Well,
anything. It's terrible.
I'll
Before
tell you
moving
what.
on to the next project.
If I'm maybe giving you. It's always useful to know what it's like to be in a Yemeni drone attack. It's the kind of thing which, as a writer, you may think, "Ooh, good scene, like that."
Yeah.
File that one away. Yeah.
We're getting we're a long way from Wilbur Smith, except for the fact that what the film is about, is the way that the writing springboards. It's almost like his imagination fires other people's imagination to kind of. It's almost like he's giving you ideas in the stories for what you can do in life,
Yeah.
and there are people who clearly were directly influenced by that.
Yeah.
And I know that in my own life, I was influenced by him telling me when I was sort of just thinking about going into fiction, and being incredibly encouraging, because as a journalist, I was so used to have somebody else tell me what the story was, and I just go off and report it. I was a bit nervous about it. It wasn't that I didn't think I could write stories, but why would anybody care? What right had I got to inflict them on anybody else? And Wilbur was very encouraging and inspirational and supportive of me in doing that, long before we ever worked. I mean, 20 years before we ever worked together.
Yeah.
So, he definitely had direct
We were
influence.
talking earlier about, how Aidan, you found these stories to put in the movie, but I think all of us have found that they just come out there everywhere. So the mechanic who services my car, I was chatting to him a little while ago, and he said, "Oh, I hear his dad's a neighbour of mine." She's like, "Oh, I hear you've been working for Wilbur Smith," and I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, I love Wilbur Smith, and he was the reason I went to South Africa, lived there for 10 years, met my wife, and his entire life had been shaped. That again was all because he'd read the books.
Wow.
So you're right, Diana, that it's almost like it. I mean, obviously, loads of people write adventure books, loads of people write thrillers, but there's something about Wilbur that seems to get in people's heads and just like unlock that door that say, yes, you can do this.
I think it's because I was thinking about this myself, like you don't read, as it were, a Hercule Poirot book and think either I'm going to be a murderer or I'm going to be this little Belgian detective with moustaches.
I'm going to go to Belgium.
Yes, but I think if you think about a lot of his characters, it's not like they're not secret agents. They're not part of an institution. He does have some of the more modern books, sort of ex-SAS, but they're people who are to some extent. I mean, they're extraordinary, ordinary people. But then quite often, like say we were talking recently about Robin Ballantyne. She's a kind of an unusual character in being a woman who's become a doctor in 19th century Britain, but she's nevertheless just a young woman who is thrown into an extraordinary situation. So she's relatable, and so is Zuga from the man's point of view. And so they're characters who are not, as much as they have qualities that were sort of aspirational, they don't have any extra superpowers.
No.
Do you know what I mean? They're put into these situations, and the situations are made to seem so exciting, and because they're so vivid, and because a lot of the thing that is vivid is about a place that, as you've just been discovering, you can actually go to.
Yeah,
I think it's that sense that there is, even in a historical novel that may be set 200 years ago or 300 years ago, there's something relatable and something which says, okay, I can't be that character, but I can have my own adventures.
I was going to ask Tom that Wilbur writes so vividly about places. Did you find when you went to these places that you sort of felt you'd been there before and sort of recognized them from reading Wilbur's books?
In a way, yes. As I say, it's this weird sort of disconnect of kind of, I don't know, visiting the movie set of the movie you've seen, but the set doesn't look quite the same as the movie. So yeah, it was this odd, sort of familiar but sort of different kind of feeling. And certainly I didn't have a lot of time to spend there because it's my last day, but I drove kind of down I guess it's the Tugela Valley, and actually went quite close. Didn't realize it, but I saw a sign on turn off for Michael House School. which is obviously
Oh wow, Wilbur School.
Wilbur School, the Eton of Africa, and it was actually, I'd always imagined it, I guess, kind of like the beginning of When the Lion Feeds, of being this incredibly dusty kind of parched landscape. But actually, it's really green and verdant. And part of it was the season I was there. I think it was just after the rainy season, so it was much greener than it would be, later in the season. But completely different to how I'd imagined it.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I saw you standing in front of the Tugela. It looked so green, or in front of the Buffalo River. It looked as though you could almost been in Sussex.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's about 43 times the size of Sussex. I know what you mean. I mean, yes, it's true that if you, I live on the Sussex Downs, so you can get up on the top of the downs and you can see quite a long way. But I mean, it's a much more gentle, domesticated landscape. The thing about that, the South African landscape, is it's the immensity of it, isn't it? And the huge sky. Everything is bigger. It's like Texas or something. Everything is just being multiplied by 10. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Tom, were the Zulu battlefields as haunting and extraordinary as you were expecting them to be?
I was just about to. I was just looking up. I just get this spelling of Isandwala, so I could say Isandwala.
Yes, Isandwala is amazing, and that is very haunting. Rorke's Drift. Rorke's just weird because you feel like because you've seen the movie of Zulu, so you have a very vivid image of what it looks like, and it actually doesn't really look like that. So that was again a kind of disconnect. But Isandwala is amazing.
So what is it? When you get there, what is the haunting aspect of it? How do you feel it?
Because without specifically, you've got this great kind of knob of rock kind of sticking up out of the plain, again, like some sort of Monument Valley type thing. And you've actually got, as I recall, you've got like little plaques in the ground that tell you sort of where different units were as they kind of got hacked to pieces.
Oh my God.
So you don't have to, the reminders are literally underfoot as to kind of what's happened there. The other interesting thing about Isandwala when I was there was that it was very close. It was like 3 days before the anniversary, coincidentally. And there's a massive marquee up because the Zulus still use it as a great kind of rallying point, a great kind of moment of victory in their sort of national past. So
quite right too.
Well, yeah. So the Zulu king was actually some great Zulu dignitary was going to rock up and use it for a sort of a big celebration of Zuluness on the anniversary of the battle. So again, that was
well. We do tours to the battlefields of Waterloo or D-Day or stuff. So
yeah,
I mean, they're entitled to go.
Yeah.
Does Wait Courtney, that outcrop you were talking about, doesn't Wait Courtney die sort of halfway up that?
Yeah, right at the very top, I think. He sort of retreats up it. And I think he's one of the last ones to be killed near the top, yeah.
But Aidan, you've lived in Africa, haven't you? So you know quite a lot about Africa.
Yeah, East Africa. So I lived in Tanzania for about 2 years, and that's how I got into filmmaking, actually. I was traveling. I kind of did a Wilbur, and ended up after university kind of taking a little bit of time out, wanted to go and see Africa because my dad, as I said earlier, had been regurgitating Wilbur Smith stories, pretending they were his own and telling me, you've got to go and see Africa. It won't be around forever. You've got to go and see it the way I'm describing it.
Yeah.
And so I did, and then I ended up in Kenya for a while. And then the BBC rocked up making a series called Big Cat Diary.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd somehow, through, this is very, very how you get things done in Nairobi, I needed a work permit, and I met some guy who knew some guy who knew some guy whose brother worked in the immigration office, slipped my passport in, bing, 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 got a 2-year work permit. And then suddenly the BBC are there saying, gosh, if only we had someone who knew the area and could do this and could help out and knew a little bit about natural history. And so I fibbed and said, I can do all of that. And then in the kind of couple of days before everyone descended in the Masai Mara to start filming, I just swatted up on, got a GPS and worked out where everything was, and so I wouldn't get lost. And I used to be able to speak Swahili relatively well in those days.
Wow.
And so I got a radio and tuned. I'm telling you all my secrets here.
Yeah.
And then I tuned into all of these Safari Driver channels, because I was put by the BBC in charge of the leopard finding department, which is in its own way very flattering and damning because there's buggers to find. So I started surf. I'd go off on my own really early in the morning, leave camp in the middle of the Masai Mara, and didn't know anybody, so it would be very easy to slip out. And I'd kind of go cover of darkness and just start surfing and listening. And then I'd hear someone saying, "Oh, we found, in my very, okay Swahili. Oh, I think they're coming from over there, and they've got a leopard." So I'd scooch up, wait for them to kind of have their fill, leave. I'd then radio it in and say, "Oh, I found a leopard, BBC," and then they would come in.
Incredibly enterprising, by the way.
Found a leopard 28 days in a row, and the BBC had never experienced anything like it. They thought that I was a sort of leopard whispering god, and that's how I got into filmmaking. So.
Well, so you're not just a renegade maverick; you're a leopard whisperer as well. That's impressive.
I'm the barefaced liar. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but
yeah.
I was just, I think I'll tell you, as you were describing, I thought what's Wilbur-esque about it, is just the barefaced gumption to just go ahead and do it. That's very Wilbur, and that's what a young. I can just imagine, if again in one of his more modern books, a young Wilbur character doing precisely that kind of thing, and just having the sheer brass nerve to just.
I think his characters
and pull it off as well.
I think the books I've read, his characters seem to notice an opportunity, and there's a slit in the door, and
Absolutely.
you either go through it, you either put your toe in, block the door, barge your way in, or you let the door
barge,
close.
Definitely.
And
no, you barge. If you're a Wilbur character, you barge. You definitely barge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's my point. Is that the books teach you, and because there is a kind of concept that it's about enterprise, not in a kind of capitalist sense, but in a sense of just having the enterprise, the imagination, the energy, the determination to go after something. And I think that's definitely, if you read Wilbur Smith books and write Wilbur Smith characters, that is absolutely how they are. And so obviously if you've been hearing these stories since you were a little kid and they've been in your ear, then of course you're going to behave like that.
So Aidan, what's the most frightening thing you've done while filming?
28 leopards sounds like quite a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, that cobra is pretty high up the list.
I remember once. Well, it wasn't frightening at the time, but I remember I'm not very good with heights, and I remember I was in Chile and doing some filming, and this guy said, "I've got a helicopter. Would you like to go? I can take you up and you can get some aerial shots." And so I just thought, yeah, great, fantastic. So I turn up and he's taken all the doors off, and he says, basically, you can sit there and you can put your feet on the little ramps that the helicopter skids, and then you can just lean out and film. You get a lovely uninterrupted view. Then the helicopter won't be in your shot. So I'm thinking again that. Yeah, how kind of him. That's very thoughtful to say it that way. I get some nice clean shots. So we go up. He then gives me a bungee, and that's put around my waist, and then it's sort of just tied to a chair, and then we go quite high, I have to say, and then he decides that we'll fly over an active volcano, because they have a lot of those in Chile. So there's one point where I'm filming, and the shot looks great, and it's this beautiful volcano that's snow covered, because they have these snow covered volcanoes, but it's wisping, and then the sun is rising behind us, which is casting the volcano to create this incredible shadow that goes on for as far as the horizon. And then the wind changes, and then all of the wispy stuff starts to come towards us, and I'm smelling it, and it's quite toxic. And at that point, I remember kind of going, I'm frightened. Suddenly it hit me. I think it's because I took my eye away from the eyepiece, and I thought, oh my God, I'm about 10,000 feet up. I'm terrified of heights. I'm being poisoned, and I'm being held on by some shoelaces with a man I've never met before. And I don't know if he's any good flying a helicopter. And it's things like that and I question my own sanity rather than anything. But I just keep saying yes to stuff. But luckily, nothing's really taken me out yet. So touch wood. But
I noticed when you were filming this film, you had a drone to go up and get those aerial shots.
Yes, that's right. Those were in the olden days before you had drones. Nowadays,
Yes.
the drone does it all. Yes, absolutely right.
Oh, I love the aerial. I love the aerial shot of Tom's house. I went back and rewound several times. And
Yes, that was not done in a helicopter at all. That was I was firmly on the ground.
Yeah. Hearing all these stories, I'm actually now rather glad that you didn't come with me to South Africa. I think that's probably safer with the selfie stick.
Yes, magnet for disaster, I'm afraid. Yeah. But
I'd say there's so much more of Wilbur's Africa to film that I'm sure we could find something for Aidan that would scare the life out of him. I would love to go down the Nile and follow the story of River God.
Yeah.
Which, of course, you can't do at the moment. Well, I don't think Sudan's very safe at the moment, is it?
Well, no, and quite a lot of what is in River God takes place in Sudan and in parts of Ethiopia, which probably aren't very safe either.
Ethiopia, I find so tantalizing.
Yeah.
A fascinating country.
Have you ever been to Ethiopia, Aidan?
I did once to film the churches, but it was an in and out job. Yeah, Lalabella, I think, and it's very beautiful. Yeah. That was spectacular. But I've got a quick question for you guys. So do you find, say for example, with Wilbur, that we've learnt with all these different real people that have been affected by his work and have gone on to be inspired by him to lead their lives in a certain way. Do you think that if you've got a Wilbur story that you've read, or a journey, or some characters that have undergone something within a particular environment on a journey, and you would like to, like as you were saying, you'd like to do the Nile the way that there is in River Gods, or do you think that gives you a much more exciting agency to go off and follow that, or would you rather go and do an experience entirely fresh and original on your own?
I quite like having a sense of purpose. It sort of focuses the mind. I've never been one for just going off and traveling. I've gone tons of different places, and it's often or usually been as a journalist on assignment. There was a reason you were going to a place. There was something you had to get when you were there, a piece of information or a story or interview somebody, whatever it was. So for me, I'm very. I think it's just the journalist. You go in, you get what you want, you come out again. I think I've just spent too long doing that. That's how I think of it. I'm very, very objective driven.
I do understand what you mean, Dan. I was going to say the same to you, Tom, because your trip, I think you, if I may put words in your mouth, I think you had a great time because you had a wonderful itinerary to follow that was mirroring things that you'd read about, but then you could go off-piste as well in between.
Yeah. And in fact, it is pretty much coincidentally because the trip was planned basically on sort of the most logical route to hit all the places I wanted to see. But actually, the book that came out of it is a book called Warrior King, which is the one that's coming out next year. And the journey of the character actually starts in Cape Town, goes to Durban as it is now, then kind of goes up into Zululand, and then eventually ends up in the Drakensberg. So actually, the progress of the book mirrors almost precisely my actual itinerary, which wasn't planned at all.
Oh, that's great.
But yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, I think as a travel writer, I've always found if you go to a place with a purpose, you get so much more out of it, so much more depth. And I think with regard to Wilbur's books, I mean, I wouldn't have known I wanted to go down the Nile, or I wouldn't have known I wanted to do the garden route in South Africa or whatever. I simply wouldn't have known. So, A, he opens you up to these places, and then B, he excites you about them. So you want to find all those points of excitement that you've remembered from the books.
I was going to say the other thing we're missing out is people. I mean, I'm as interested in finding characters. It's just as much as the landscape. You have to get a character that matches the place, and there's the human aspect is at least as important as the natural one.
Yeah, definitely. And again, that's, as you say, we're all kind of talked about the characters and the landscape, and Wilbur inhabited that landscape like no one else. So in a sense, we're all trying to catch up with him.
The sort of fact that I love is like the one you told us, Tom, about the second highest waterfall in the world
Yes.
on the Tugela. I had no idea. I mean, I love that sort of
Just
thing.
out of curiosity, when you say the second highest, you mean it can't be the second highest in altitude. Is it like the drop is the second greatest drop?
Yeah, the drop. Yeah, the drop.
So
Yeah.
it's Angel Falls or something like that. Isn't that like in South America? Isn't that the
That's supposed to be the highest, yes.
right? So this is just second to the Angel Falls. Okay.
Yeah.
And is it when you get to the top? Is it a hell of a long way down?
Yeah, it's very, very long way down, and just like sheer cliff. In this sort of, I say, this massive kind of natural amphitheater made by the mountains. It's an extraordinary place.
Wow.
That's not the one where occasionally you see people doing selfies in a little pool at the very top, where there's a natural pool with a shelf edge and then this drop off. And
I don't know.
Isn't
that
no,
Vic Falls?
Victoria Falls has that, doesn't Victoria? Vic Falls has that, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, that the other one may do too, but I know the Vic Falls has got a place where you can, if you're mad enough to sort of risk the car, because one false move, and,
Insanity.
you know.
Yeah, I did not take my selfie stick up there, so I cannot report back.
Yeah, well, that's why we didn't get the shot. You see, now and this is where the editor and me said, "Okay,
Yeah,
where's the shot?
exactly.
Where's the money? You didn't get the money shot."
Yeah, well, that's why I needed Aidan with me,
We
because he'd have
Yeah.
Aidan would have put me in the pool and then pushed me over the thing just to get the shot.
That's right. Yeah.
And his
As long as I've got your
Yeah.
release form, it's fine.
I must say it's great credit to you, Tom, that your piece came out so well, considering I thought you had a huge crew around you. The fact that you'd done it all yourself and it came out so professional.
He's kind of an auteur, isn't he? You're like Bradley Cooper or Woody Allen. You're both the star and the director.
Yes, if you look at the
Clint Eastwood, you look like Clint Eastwood too.
it's for all our podcast listeners, I can assure you this is 100% true. I look exactly like Clint Eastwood. Just
Do you feel lucky, Punk?
Yeah. No, I'm glad it worked out.
Did you enjoy filming, Tom? Did you? Sorry, I'll ask that again.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the process of being forced to film things while you were on your journey?
I hated it less than I thought I would. I thought I would absolutely hate it. And actually, although there was definitely moments when I felt self-conscious, I really liked doing it forced me to kind of reflect on what I was doing rather than just kind of go, and just take those moments. And sometimes it was nice. Like, so I think there's a bit of the movie where I come to Shakaland, which is like the Zulu themed.
Yeah.
Great.
Disneyland, effectively, without the rides. And there's just the incongruity of it. And I think I just flicked on the camera and just talked about how I was feeling about it. And it was nice to for my own sake, actually, to commit that to memory, to the record, and to remember that. But also, it's not just me on my own in a car thinking, "God, this is mad," but actually to be, someone else will know what that moment was.
And also that the diminutive, teeny weeny Zulu warrior called Ron. I thought that was a wonderful comedy moment. I thought.
Right.
Yeah.
This arrow, this arrow, this Prate's arrow, it says Ron.
That's right. I do like those because I think we decided to make them almost like little postcard moments. Some of those shots.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The writing as well. Yeah, that was great. And an arrow. Yeah.
But I like the fact, actually, particularly in the early bits, that you weren't slick.
Thank you. I think
it's actually made because
Charming.
No, absolutely. I mean it nicely. It was very honest. It was like, because it's not somebody who's just who's sort of so professionalized that it seems a bit bogus and a bit kind of. It was very direct. And very you, and I really like. I'm not for once. I'm actually not taking the mickey. I really did like it, and I like the fact that it was like, here's somebody giving a very honest account, and they're not, as I say, they're not just doing a routine that they could have knocked off 1,000 times. This is somebody who really has not used a selfie stick before and is a little bit embarrassed about doing it, like any of us would be. And I think it really was incredibly effective. And then as your kind of adventure went on, you kind of got more and more used to it. And then you did end up in some quite amazing places that made me think, gosh, I'd like to go there.
Yeah, I'd not thought about that. Yeah.
Were you one take, Tom, or did you have to do a lot of takes?
It looked as though, that was it. That was the one
Yeah.
take.
I can answer that because I had to look through it all. I didn't quite know how Tom would take to it, because I could see underneath his sort of smiling, nodding, slightly grumpy acceptance of the task and my sheet of do's and don'ts. I was thinking, I've got a funny feeling here that we might only get one or two, shots or one or two little postings back. So then when I saw how many Tom had actually done, like he very cleverly thought of it like doing a diary, so that there was a sense of structure to follow, and it worked perfectly and beautifully.
Yeah, it does.
And he was a one-take wonder. Every single one of those things is one take, and he's cleverly kind of left a little bit of an in and a little bit of an out, so that there's a bit of a pause, so we could edit around the things nicely. He did that's spot on. It was very, very good and great fun to edit. And
did you have to say that? God, he's going to be insufferable now. You do realise that, don't you? So, God's sake.
I'm just waiting for you to sign me up for the sequel now.
Well,
I feel like I've earned it.
Yes,
Absolutely.
true. Well, I think we've got enough to make another one, haven't we?
Yes, yeah.
The journey behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We definitely all want to be in the sequel.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Or maybe a podcast making of.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have to do a podcast from the Nile somewhere, or from the top of Table Mountain, or from the Great Zimbabwe, or something.
that'd be good.
We definitely have to.
Absolutely.
And we'll need somebody to film us doing it.
Yeah.
I'm your man.
I mean, I guess my question for you, Aidan, is, having talked about having been your own kind of harshest critic, and been given this sort of tough brief to make the movie about the author who doesn't want to be in the movie, were you happy with the way it turned out?
I really, really held in my head, how will the people involved respond? So those are the people I want to be happy. So yourself, for example, or you mentioned earlier on, there's a guy in it who's kite surfing, or there's a fella who is a sculptor who, we go up in his plane that he built himself, and he's very inspired by Wilbur. So all of these wonderful people gave their time and their energy and their effort. So I kind of felt, and also the great man himself, I always had in the back of my mind, Wilbur and Nisa will sit down and watch this, and what will they think? So it wasn't all the other people. It wasn't me, really. It was all of these other sort of, members of the public that might watch it. It was the people involved and the main people that it was about, Wilbur, and Nisa by extension. And so once I had heard that, for example, there was a lovely story with Wilbur and Nisa that I knew. I'd been told that they were going to watch it on a particular evening. When it was finished, it was edited, it had been graded, the sound had all been mixed beautifully, and there was the finished product. Off it went to Nisa and Wilbur, and I sort of kept looking at the phone, going, "Was there a message through? Or is there nothing yet at all?" God, I would have thought maybe I'd have something while they watch it. Nothing at all. And then there was a pause of about 5-10 minutes, and then just this sort of simple line came through, which was, they both cried. So that kind of made me go, "Oh, now I think that we did a good job."
Oh wow! I loved the bit where is it Tom Wakeling? Is that
Chris Wakeling?
Sorry, Chris
Wakeling.
Chris Wakeling. Sorry. I love the bit with Chris Wakeling and his father, who was the RAF pilot. And the two things that were lovely about that were a number of things. That just like you, Aidan, that it wasn't that his father had read the stories to him, but he'd been reading. That Chris had got into reading Wilbur's books as a kid from seeing his father read them, and then they'd read them. They'd go on holiday and they'd read the same book together, and it was a point of contact between them, which was really lovely.
Yeah.
And it was then supposed to be, and his father had been an Air Force pilot, so a jet pilot, a fighter pilot.
He was a Top Gun.
Yeah, incredibly Top Gun, actually gone off there and beaten the Americans their own game, kind of thing. and so as kind of macho heroic a job as you could have, but he said, "Oh, I'm so in awe that Chris is writing with Wilbur Smith," and
That's
it
right.
was just so sweet. And then
Very sweet.
there was a
Yeah.
moment where he was watching his younger self in the jets, and he got very emotional, and it was just. But what was lovely was the idea that these books, they had acted as this glue in a father-son relationship and an inspiration to both of them, that had then of course been given a new life with one of them then co-writing with Wilbur. I thought that was just the most beautiful sequence.
It's strange how that theme came up again and again and again with different people we spoke to. I obviously didn't want to make it too repetitive, but for example, a number of fathers and sons would say, especially in kind of that slightly more as you consider machismo, macho kind of world,
Yeah.
where you don't really talk about your feelings. And so Wilbur's books were something that could, or like a catalyst for conversation and
Yeah.
get fathers and sons. Okay, they weren't going to talk about their feelings, but maybe they were indirectly through.
Well, they create a neutral, something like that creates what you might call a safe space. It's a neutral space where you can talk about things, and you're sharing it, and it's kind of non-controversial, and it's not.
Yeah.
But stuff will come out in the conversations.
Yeah.
It's bound to.
Yeah. Well, for example, Chris said to me not long after we finished that scene where in the movie you've got the father and son watching the old archive footage of the father being a Top Gun,
who was incredible when he got out of you see the picture of him as a young man getting out of his jet.
Magnificent looking.
It does look like a movie star.
Absolutely,
I mean, absolutely does.
Movie star. But weirdly, the conversations that were naturally inspired by them watching, after and the father got very emotional. After we'd finished and had a cup of tea and said our goodbyes, Chris sort of escorted me to the door and he said, "Thank you so much. We've never spoken about that before."
Wow.
So even the act of making the film had been the act of making a film about Wilbur's books that are a catalyst was another catalyst for them.
Yes,
so
yes,
really
yes.
Interesting. Yeah. It was very moving.
That was definitely one of my favorite sequences in the film, apart from all of Tom's bits, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, we talked about the things that inspire people, Wilbur's sort of extraordinary inspirational effect on people. And I mean, his books, that obviously covers a lot of ground, but if there's one theme that's like core Wilbur, it is fathers and sons. And I think it's that married with the characters, married with the extraordinary places. But I think maybe it's that particularly for men, but obviously also for women, really it gets inside people's heads, because these are some of the most kind of fundamental relationships we have, and Wilbur's just like always sort of dissecting that, and these novels speak to those relationships.
Yeah, they do. Anybody who's listened to this podcast, who I'm sure is now thinking, I really want to see Wilbur Smith Inspiring Adventures, it's on Amazon Prime. It's right there. I found it with no trouble at all. Just go onto your search, put in Wilbur Smith, and it will pop up, and it's well worth watching.
Alternatively, if you look for movies starring Tom Harper, there is only one.
Yes, yes,
and it is this.
But I think that's a category which is bound to get bigger. I mean, I frankly, I would be astounded if there aren't phones ringing in Hollywood even now.
I mean, I think they're looking at the new Netflix series, frankly.
That would be good, actually. Do we know anyone in there?
Well, thank you very, very much to Aidan Woodward for joining us.
Pleasure.
And being such a really great and anecdotal leopard finding guest. We've never had a guest before.
Volcano skimming.
Yeah, I mean, boy, that's the most Wilbur-esque guest we've had so far. So thumbs up to that.
Nice hanging out with you guys. Very nice to talk to you.
The absolute highlight of the trip, of course, has been going to see Wilbur himself and Niso. Meeting Wilbur at his house here in Africa, to see him in his study sitting at this desk where he's written so many of these great, enduring novels and surrounded by all his research materials and his history was just an amazing experience. He was gracious, very friendly. He knows what he's about. He told me to do the best I could with the writing and make it the best I can, which obviously I will. Yeah, he's a great man. and a really great mentor. So, goodbye, video diary.
That Wilbur Smith Show is produced by Christopher Wynne. Music by Dewey DeLay. Executive producer Niso Smith.